Welcome back to another Pumpice devlog. This is the third one, and in this devlog I finished up the basic mechanics for Pumpice. Starting with the player, there's finally blending for the animations since I've enabled that property in the animation player, and I've also gone ahead and implemented some of the previously made animations along with their respective mechanics. Jumping now has an animation that changes speed depending on your velocity and acceleration. Lunging is a new mechanic that allows you to get to harder to reach areas or increase your speed while moving, and if you let go of directional input, it gets cancelled. Taking damage sends you flying at a random velocity and plays an animation in the air before hitting the ground, where another animation plays and shortly after you regain control of the player. Swimming is a new mechanic that makes the player float, but also move slower. In an area of water, by holding the jump button, the player can swim up and jump out of the water area, and if the player is hurt, or could be hurt while in the water, it will actually cancel any current or future forms of paralysis caused by taking damage while in water. I'll explain the swimming mechanic more, and why it was added later in the video. I saved this for last, since it was the biggest mechanic to implement, but there is now sliding. To understand how this works, let's break it down. In geometry, all faces have something called normals. These are perpendicular lines that point in the direction of the face. In Godot, the face normal is represented as a vector 3. In Pumpice, by using the raycast, I can get the normal of the surface the player is standing on, and I use this to make the player, beyond certain magnitudes, slide by adding the magnitude of the face normal directly to the player's velocity. For example, if the vector of the face normal is more than 0.5 in either x or z values, then the player will slide if no input is given. However, if the face normal is more than 0.72 in either x or z values, then the player loses all control until they are no longer on such a steep slope. To ensure that there is no snagging of any kind, the max floor angle is changed depending on the magnitude of the current floor normal as well. Initially, on small slopes like the one that I tested, it may not seem like there are any advantages to using slopes to build momentum, but in the slide state, the player can build up to 4 times the amount of momentum compared to walking, and twice the amount of momentum compared to lunging. Mechanically, this took a long time to figure out and was successfully implemented after separating the slide logic into a different state, which problematically I wasn't doing before. Of course, to introduce a slide mechanic requires accompanying animation, to which there is. Lucy will sit on her butt when going down a slope. Not only that, but by taking the global transform of the player model and the floor normal, by using some code I found from a Kids Can Code article, the transform of the player can align to the surface it's standing on, and with some lerping, it assists in animating sliding. Lastly, if the player does not press any movement keys while on a slope, then by taking the atan2 of the player's x and z velocity, we can lerp the y rotation of the model to face in the direction of the player's velocity, creating a convincing slide for the player. I'd also like to give thanks to Jefftastic for providing help on figuring out how to implement the sliding physics. Next, let's talk about some of the new visuals in Pumpice. I made a texture for the materials on the map and made a model of a pumpkin, a house, and a watering can. And for the player, there are now vertex colors instead of shading provided by real-time per pixel lighting akin to N64 games. If you all would like, I could make a basic tutorial about my implementation in Godot, as in recent versions it was a bit of a pickle to figure out. As for the watering can, it uses a reflective metal shader from Menacing Mecha's Godot N64 shader demo repository, and speaking of shaders, Pumpice now uses a few of them. By using a convoluted setup of sub-viewports and sub-viewport containers, as well as a back buffer copy with a color rect, quite a few shaders are used for the game's current look. The first shader used is the accurate CRT shader with some alpha fixes from the Godot Retro Shader repository. Then there is another shader from Ahopness on the Godot Shaders website, which is an NCSC shader with alpha fixes. Finally, from the Godot N64 shader repository, a Gaussian blur shader is applied to smooth the look of the game out. Since the setup for the shaders happens in 2D through the sub-viewports, in the project settings by setting stretch mode to canvas items, the resolution of the viewport scales with the window size, removing any visible pixelation caused by low resolutions. Also, there's a CRT frame around the game, which not only adds aesthetic value, but also serves as a nice way to blend/hide the screen borders when changing the game window's aspect ratio. Before I get onto the last part of this video, I wanted to talk about the game's music, which you're hearing right now in the video. WaterNova composed these tracks, which serve as the main themes for the sections of levels in Pumpice. I helped a little bit as well, and I think that the tracks made so far turned out great. There will probably be a few more, but since Pumpice is not a big game, there won't be so many. For the last part of this video, I wanted to talk about the direction that the game is going in. Initially, the idea was that the game would happen around a farm with mostly flat terrain and geometry with some point of interest in each quadrant. After playing around in it, I came to the conclusion that it would be pretty boring if you're just jumping around and going to different places on a flat map. So to provide interest, I turned the map into an island with canyons instead. This forces the player into smaller points of interest, but segments the game around focused areas, splitting gameplay into a better flow. This is also why there's a swimming mechanic in the game, as in case you might have to go off the island, then you'll need to swim. So that's where I am right now. By the next devlog, I'll try and have a couple of levels ready with some mechanics to show what the gameplay will look like. So that's all for now, and I'll see you in the next devlog.